that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello everybody. This is gonna be a new running series on my channel. I've decided where I will go through comic books, but like actual, like superhero stuff, which I've never really done before. And I'm not very good at comic book reviewing as much. I'm not gonna really talk about the art. Either it's good or I don't like it, and that's the limited two insights you hear from me on that. But on this channel, I primarily talk Star Wars. And, I'm going through the Dune stuff still, and it takes a bit. It's a long read, but, comic books are a lot quicker to get through, which can provide more content. But one thing I've never really told anyone, I mean, I've had a couple live streams, like my favorite movie version of Spider-Man is Tobey. But the thing is that my favorite heroes in fiction, at least superhero-wise, has always been Batman and Spider-Man, which I know isn't a very unique take, right? I was never a big comic book reader growing up. The only things I really read were, funnily enough, Marvel Zombies, which is kind of a spin-off of the Ultimate Universe. So, I just wasn't a comic book reader. It just wasn't my thing. But the expanded universe of Star Wars is what got me into comic book reading, because once I learned that everything was connected, including the comics, I had to read the comics. And you get those amazing stories with the Republic comics, the KOTOR comics, the Legacy comics, all phenomenal stuff. Even stuff in the Dark Times whatnot, but, it got me into it. It made me more willing to do it. And it may not be an original take to say that Spider-Man is one of my favorites, but, I didn't grow up reading comic books. I only watched the movies and stuff, and I liked Wolverine growing up, with Hugh Jackman and everything. I watched the 90s animated show as it would come out on Toon Disney, which is now Disney XD, but I'm so old that I remember when it was still called Toon Disney back in the day. There was a whole big event when they changed the entire channel name, but I remember watching that. I remember watching the 90s animated Spider-Man show. Loved it. I remember watching that really unique MTV Spider-Man show that came out for like a season or two. That was interesting. I remember watching that as well. I remember playing the Spider-Man Web of Shadows and Spider-Man, the ones based off the Sam Raimi films, and the Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions and Edge of Time, or whatever it's called, where Miguel O'Hara and him, so I played all those games. I played a lot of Spider-Man games. I, watched all the movies, watched all the shows, watched Spectacular Spider-Man, watched Ultimate Spider-Man, though I kind of didn't like that as much, so I kind of dipped off, but, so I am a fan of Spider-Man. I didn't really read the comics, but I was a fan of the core story anyway. And Batman's kind of the same way. The only comic I've really read of Batman is The Killing Joke, and mostly I've just watched the movies. But I've always liked Batman. That's my favorite DC and my favorite Marvel. Maybe if I read more comics, I'd have a more nuanced opinion on my favorite, but I don't know, there's something about Spider-Man. It's something that everybody's kind of said. It's not like I can say anything new, but Spider-Man's always been an inspiration, in much the same way that Jesus is my real life inspiration. Of course, you get the atheists in the comments going, well, he's not real, or he's not God, da 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 da. No. But, and then there's Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, and he taught me about forgiveness, and, believing that there can still be good in people, even when they don't show it. Vader taught me redemption. But Spider-Man was a responsibility. You know? Batman more about grief, overcoming it, becoming stronger. But Spider-Man was always about responsibility. And of course he's the most relatable. He's a kid, like you were when you were growing up. Batman's not a kid. He's a grown man, right? A billionaire. Kind of hard to relate to it. Of course, there's so much stuff to Batman to where you can relate to it. But Spider-Man's a different story, right? Because he's grounded. He's not a billionaire. I mean, I know there's comics where he eventually becomes one, but that's after several stories, right? But he's just a normal guy that gets abnormal powers. And what does he do with it? I'm talking all serious like this because I have not finished it. But this may be one of my favorite stories of all time. And if you've grown up watching the Spider-Man films and shows, you know the origin story of Spider-Man. You know the origin story to a lot of these villains, right? You've seen it time and time and time again, done in slightly different ways. But I think I found the one that is the most human. All that long way to say, I'm starting a series on the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. I started here because I figured it's a smaller universe. Less comics to get through, less things to read. I mean, I hear the Ultimate Universe outside of Spider-Man kind of sucks, but I still think it'd be fun and interesting to read, and just to give an interesting perspective on that, because an easier universe to dive into, and then I can jump into the main one someday. It's a lot of money. But I'm reading Ultimate Spider-Man by Brian Michael Bendis. And other people, but he's the primary one. And I'm only going to be talking about the first 5 issues because I feel there's a lot to talk about here. You know it takes 5 issues for Uncle Ben to die? Do you know what that does to help the story? Do you know how well they could just use this to tell a story? I don't know why Disney or Sony or anyone, Sony isn't even beholden to Disney. They can do whatever they want. Sony should put some funding into a TV show, like with the budget of, maybe not the budget of Game of Thrones or anything, but a high budget, so you could do the Spider-Man special effects and all that. Hell, I'll take an animated show, another one. I don't care. But this, perfectly, you could have 2 50, 45-minute episodes, and it would be these first 5 issues. Might I add that Spider-Man has only become Spider-Man by issue 5. That's crazy. And that could fill 2 episodes worth. This is slow. This comic. It's slow. It is a character piece first and plot second. And I think, where I'm at, that's kind of what I prefer in my stories. I don't need, I mean, a good plot is great, that's awesome, but I think characterization and characters are far more important. How do you feel when you read a story? It can change everything. You can have the best plot in the world, but if your characters suck, nobody's going to care. If your character moments suck, no one's going to care. And I think this does an excellent job of that. Issue 1, we see a lot of the typical things with bowling and stuff with Peter. But I think the thing that sticks out to me most about it is the isolation panels, where everything goes dark and it's just Peter. He feels like he's alone. He has his friend Harry Osborn, but Harry's the one that's nice to him. But he doesn't really relate to him, doesn't really understand him, but he's there. Except for when he talks about things he's passionate about, then he runs off. We have Mary Jane, who is a bit more of a nerd in this series, which I think I like. She's smart. She's not how she usually is portrayed as, this super popular chick. She's not. And I kind of like that. because they're just friends at the start of this, at least, and I think that's great. And every character that I've seen so far has nuance. I mean, besides, I guess, Norman Osborn, he seems the least. He seems the most uh, two-dimensional right now, which is funny because we're talking about comic book panels. But everybody else feels so alive. And might be blasphemous, but this may be my favorite version of Uncle Ben. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We also get to see Harry's neglect. He tries to talk to his father about a school project that he's doing in science because he knows his dad's a scientist. And his dad couldn't be bothered less. Barked for his wife to take him away. He had an important business call after all. Couldn't be bothered. Making Harry feel like a burden. And the also interesting thing about this series is that Norman knows. Because they were at Oscorp when Peter got bit, and they're kind of like tailing him and stalking him and trying to figure out things. So they know that something's going on with Peter. They know that he has supernatural powers. So I don't think it will take too much for him, or supernatural, like superpowers. I don't think it will take too much for Norman to realize that it's Peter and Spider-Man are one and the same. Issue 2. I just want to mention I thought it was funny. There's one shot or one panel of a memory of a picture from the past when May, Uncle Ben, and Peter went on vacation, and they're wearing mouse hats because they were at Disneyland. I just think it's funny now, since this was obviously written before Disney bought the rights. Bills. I think it's in the last issue. Peter gets all these powers, and he accidentally breaks Thompson's hand. So now they gotta pay for it. And it's just the whole conversation that Ben and May have about bills that they have to pay, and that they're gonna have to charge it because they just don't have the money. It's very real, very human. I liked it a lot. And the anger and the angst we see from Peter, we've seen it across all different forms of media. It's nothing new. I mean, this came out first, I guess, as compared to some of the newer stuff, but it works really well. We also see Doc Ock is also at the Oscorp facility. He's not a villain yet, but he's around, but we know who he is, so. Issue 3 I thought was funny because this is when he gets into the, wrestling sort of thing. But his first suit, his first attempt at a suit, looks a lot like what Miles' suit would later be. I mean, it's just like a red sweater and like a black mask with like red eyes, which is kind of like what Miles would get later. So, which another thing to mention about this comic, if you don't know, I mean, it's going to be a long bit before we get there, but this is the comic that originally introduced Miles Morales as a being, as a character. Then later on comic books would pick him up and do stuff with him down the road, but he was introduced here originally, first time. What I also like about this rendition of the story is that Peter does all this, does the whole wrestling thing for his family, for the mistake that he made. And he's doing the wrestling stuff so he could provide them money. Which I love that. Also, minus the webs and the Spider-Man logo, or the spider logo, I thought it was funny that the announcer is the one that ends up giving Peter his iconic suit. In issue 4, Peter's grades are dropping because he's been focusing on the wrestling. And his aunt and uncle confront him about it. And he runs off, crashes at a bully's place. What I also like about this is that, this is one of the bullies who's like heckling at him in the first issue, and here he is saying like, yeah, you can crash in my place if you really can't be home. Like, see, nuance. Right, and then he's flirting with this hot girl or whatever, who's kind of drunk, which is a little bit messed up on Peter's part, but he's young, it's okay. And then Mary Jane walks in. Even though they're not together, she likes him, so drama. But who's at the front door when he goes to open it to run after MJ? It's Ben. He found him. This is where we get the speech. And yet it's told in a different way. At least a different way from how I remember it. And yet I think it hammers the point home a bit better for us. Even more so. He talks about what Peter's father used to live by, like his mantra, his code, which is that if you are good at something, doesn't matter what it is, and you have the ability to help people or make people feel better, then it is your duty, if you are gifted with that, to help them. Which I always got that was the gist of the point, but having it spoken so eloquently within it was beautiful. Because yeah, Peter's got powers, he's got to help save people. That's his duty. But it is our duty, with whatever gifts we have, to use it to the fullest, And in the Bible it talks about for God's glory. You may not believe in that, and that's okay. But, I think I'm fairly empathetic. And I try to use that to be as helpful as I can to the people I care about. I don't think I'm very talented at much. But it was really a great panel. And that's, I don't have too much else to say about that. You know the line, you know the speech, but it was a little bit different here, and I enjoyed it a lot. And then issue 5, it begins with the Goblin. In the last issue, Osborn kind of injected himself with stuff, and now he's a big hulking Goblin. And he goes home and kills his wife, and now Harry is alone to see his mom burning alive and everything, so that's fun. Also, the difference with this rendition is that, Ben was now on the street looking for Peter. They were at home, and the guy, in the previous issue, there was this guy trying to rip off this vendor and take his money, and Peter did nothing to stop it. We all know this. So that guy comes to Peter's house later and ends up shooting Uncle Ben. But what I also love is Uncle Ben's final words before he gets shot is him chuckling and saying, "Look, dude, you probably have more money than we do." Sucks. And of course, Peter's sad. He finds the one who did it, but doesn't kill him. Leaves him for the authorities. We also get a mention of Captain Stacy here, so Gwen and everything. And the timeless lesson. Doesn't matter whether it's in this comic, whether it's in the main comics, whether it's in some spin-off, whether it's in the movies, whether it's in a game, it doesn't matter. With great power comes great responsibility. It is a timeless lesson, and it is one of the reasons that Spider-Man is such an inspiration to me. But we're starting off strong with these 5 comics, and I'm really excited to continue off of it. I'm of course still going through Dune, I'm still going to go through Star Wars, but I gotta see this all the way through now. It means a lot to me. This comic book series has to be one of the best comic books I've ever read. Even apart, it might even be better, and I've only read 5 issues, than all of the Star Wars comics. If it keeps running the course that it is. It's so good. And at least these 5 issues, I can highly recommend to you, if you haven't read them already. And if you're a Spider-Man fan, if you've watched the movies like me, you've seen the shows, but you haven't really gotten into the comics, I think this is the place you should start. Anyway, thank Thank you all so much for watching. I'm gonna head to bed. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, with great power comes great responsibility. Bye-bye.